Today, well, actually, first of all, for those of you who don't know me, which is quite possible, I am Seoli. I am the audio director for Beyond Skyrim Elsweyr. I mainly do the soundtrack there with my friend Trivial Galaxy, who I don't think is here today. Besides that, I do general audio work, audio editing, sound design, audio implementation for Beyond Skyrim, as well as level design, and I also do some interior design for Skyblivion. But today we're focusing on audio. I will start my stream on our lovely audio software called Reaper, which is, I think, a first for this for my lectures here. Today I'm going to be talking about audio editing in, for voice acting mainly. This is also usable for sound design and other general audio tasks, but it is mainly aimed at voice acting. So I'm going to be talking about a couple of things today that are important that I often see voice acting applicants do wrong, and general, things that are good to keep in mind. I've done one lecture before, which was an audio. Well, I've done three, but one of them was an audio theory, which goes a bit in depth in how sound works in physics and how audio works. And if you really want to understand this stuff, it is going to be recorded and posted to YouTube. I highly recommend you watch my audio theory lecture as well, because that will make this a bit easier to understand. But without further ado, let's just jump right in. So what I'm going to do is grab a couple of lines from one of Beyond Skyrim's mods, Where's the Time Real? Because luckily I have access to the Git, so I'm going to take advantage of that. So I assume you can all see my stream well. I got to pull it up myself, but I'm pretty sure everything is fine at the moment. It does look fine to me. If anything breaks, let me know. If the volumes are off, let me know. I can change everything. It is fine. So today, we're going to be talking about a couple of things. We're going to be talking about gates, filters, compression, EQ, and general effects. A lot of these things are very important and very fundamental, and I often see people who are new to this kind of fuck them up, which makes sense. It's kind of hard to understand. So we'll dive into it. So I have a couple of lines here from Where's the Time Real, which is one of Beyond Skyrim's kind of little misc mods that we have. First of all, I'm using Reaper here. If you're a voice actor and you're doing your editing in Audacity or something else, that's fine, but I highly recommend you dive into Reaper. It is extremely powerful, super versatile, super customizable, which is actually quite unique, and just so insanely efficient. I'm doing editing here. You can see the frame rate on everything. I don't know if it comes to the stream, but it will be on YouTube. Super high. I can add effects to all kinds of stuff super fast, whilst it is running a gigantic file in the background for the target acquire, which has like 80 tracks with a bunch of effects, and it's handling it just fine. Reaper is phenomenal, so if you want to do true editing, go into Reaper or any other DAW, but I highly recommend Reaper because it's free as well. It's like WinRAR has an infinite free trial. It is insanely powerful, and as I said, highly customizable. You can take every single shortcut in the program and you can customize it. You can even make custom shortcuts where you chain things together. So if I'm editing like a drum loop for music, I can literally press one button. It'll chop out all the drum sound. It'll categorize them based on spectrum. It's fucking crazy. So if you want to do true editing for voice acting, have a lot of control over your sound and your effects and everything else, go for Reaper. It's fantastic. With that being said, advertising out of the way, let's get into it. So we're going to start off with gates, or actually with recording, I guess. In Reaper, you can double-click here and make a new track. You can call it whatever you want. And then you have a lot of options here. And if you zoom out a little bit, although it's not showing for me right now, which is quite curious. But on your mixer window, you have inputs. In this case, I only have one because I'm on a different driver, but you want to just select your microphone here. And then press this little button, and that lets you record. And then you can record a sound. In this case, I've grabbed the stuff from Where's the Time Real? So let's listen to these lines. Let me know if everything's too quiet or too soft.
You slimy rat. I saw that.
So that's some of the lines
That to me. Now.
From our fantastic voice actors. This is, I think, Complete the Circuit.
Oh boy. I'm gonna enjoy this.
Very good voice actor, but a couple of things that could be improved. So what we're going to do in Reaper is open our effects, and we're going to talk about the first pretty important thing, which is called a noise gate. Now I don't. This is actually kind of stupid. I didn't think of that. I don't have any noisy recordings. I don't think, but I can still demonstrate this. So I'm going to take a pretty advanced gate, which does show the concept very well. This is FabFilter. Very good plugins. Quite expensive, but they're extremely good. And the reason I'm using it here is because it has a very nice visual indicator. What a gate does is it uses a threshold, which is a very common thing within audio, which uses a decibel level. You can see my audio goes through here. You can't hear it right now. It's fine. And this threshold in itself does nothing. It's just an indication. And when my signal gets below, in this case, below the threshold,
Slimy rat. I saw that.
it will get muted. You can see the audio here, the black stuff is below this line and doesn't show up. And when I do this, you
Slimy rat.
can hear it kind of kicking in.
Slimy rat.
This, in this case, is useless, but when you have a microphone, it's kind of noisy. And if it's not too bad, you can use this, set it quite low, and
Slimy rat.
you can filter out noise with this. And you can have some controls over attack and decay.
Slimy
You
rat.
can hear it fading in, so you can, when the value gets above the threshold and your voice will come through, you can choose how quickly the volume gets pumped up to let your voice through. Same thing for the other end. If you want to have your voice not instantly cut off
Slimy rat.
like that, you can kind of decrease or increase the release. So this is without any release value.
Slimy rat.
Very sudden. And when I increase this,
Slimy rat.
it's a bit more subtle. So that's giving you control over the perception of it and how quickly it kind of comes in. Ratio is not super important for this. I'll talk about it later. Neither is range. That's all stuff that comes in with compression, which we'll also talk about. You slimy rat. Yeah, thanks, Pat. So the gates are very simple. You just set a value, and when the volume exceeds the value, the sounds will get through. This way, your noise is usually quieter than your voice. If not, you're kind of done for. You can set this to cut out the noise when you're not speaking. Of course, when your noise is very loud, you will hear it when you're talking as well, and that cannot be fixed with a noise gate. Can't really be fixed all that much, actually, if it really is that loud that it comes through when your voice is active. But if it's just in between your voice, you can use a noise gate to cut it out. Of course, you'd rather fix the source and make sure there isn't any noise at all, but if that's not an option, then gates are your friend. Yeah, that's kind of the thing about gates and a lot of effects in general. You can use audio editing to clean up stuff in your voice files, but only to an extent. If your source input is shit, you're not going to be able to fix it. If it's pretty good but has a couple of hiccups, you may be able to fix it with editing, but do not expect to fix major problems with editing. Editing, for the most part, is just cutting your lines up, make sure you got the right takes, and the rest of it is tweaking stuff a little bit and making sure it sounds good. But ultimately, if your input is bad, you're never going to fix that, period. So that's noise gates, very quick, not super advanced, luckily. Now moving on to the next thing. This is, do I even have this? Actually, I didn't think about this. Let's see, I have a lot of filters here. Let me quickly grab something that I might be able to use here. Do I have a simple filter plugin? I got this. Don't know what this is exactly. I guess you can sort of see it. With audio, you have filters, very common things, and these are used to cut out specific frequencies in sound. So, for example, when I have this sound of circuit speaking,
You slimy rat.
I can cut off some of the high-end frequencies.
You slimy rat.
It's a lot more muffled.
You slimy rat.
I can tweak some stuff,
You whiny rat.
and I can mess around with it, which I like to do. Oh, that's funny. Okay, funny. Anyway, lots of extra settings. I'm not gonna talk about them now. The reason I'm talking about filters is because there are more advanced plugins which are essential, which use filters. Filters are often misunderstood. You can use them like this
Slimy rat.
to cut off frequencies. Very useful stuff. The problem is digital filters are not magic. You cannot just cut off a frequency and just,
Slimy rat.
leave it at that. The reason why filters work is because they work with delay. If you watched my previous lecture on audio theory, you'll know there's something called phase cancellation, which occurs when you have the exact same sound being played on top of itself and then slightly delayed. certain frequencies get cancelled out and others do not. Essentially, filters take this and use it to their advantage to the point where you can cut out specific frequencies and leave others in. Analog filters and digital filters all use this phenomenon, and it's very powerful, very useful, but it does mean that your sound is going through a very slight delay to be able to cut those frequencies off. In itself, this isn't a problem, but this does become an issue when you use very extensive filtering, because I recommend you watch the other lecture I did on audio theory. But with a lot of filters, very aggressive filters, active, you may have a sound that's very dirty. I don't know if I can change. Yes, so here I can change how steep my filter is. A filter like this is problematic because it actually creates a little frequency bump that we can't see here. I'll show you in a second. But whenever you have a filter like this, which cuts off frequencies at the edge of the filter, it's actually going to counteract that, and it will have a bump in frequency. So these frequencies here are actually louder. It doesn't get shown up, and there is a fix for this, sort of, but it is a problem. So filters can be used to cut off specific frequencies. So we have the low-pass filter, which we just had, which is this one, which lets low frequencies through, low pass. And we have a different one. I think I can change it here. This is a high pass, and that's a band pass filter. High pass is the same but inverted, so it lets the high frequencies through. Band pass lets a specific frequency band through. And this is the opposite of that, which cuts out a specific frequency. This is a dangerous one, and this one too, because you can see very steep curves. It creates 2 extra bumps on the edges, which we'll go over in a second. So that's filters in a nutshell. Just they cut out frequencies. You can control which ones, but they do it through a delay, which is a little bit dangerous. So once again, like with gates and everything else, do not overuse these because it could be dangerous and it might fuck up your sound quality. Now we move on to some of the more advanced stuff. I was going to start with compression, but we're going to start with EQ now because filters are actually the fundamental principle behind EQ. So I'm going to grab an equalizer, very good one, once again from my favorite boys, Fab Filter. An EQ typically looks a little bit different. I think Reaper has some great stock ones. Let me see. Well, it's not a great example of it, but once again, watch my other audio theory lecture that I show some traditional EQs. This is a graphic EQ, which lets you pick your own frequency, change the width of the region you're affecting, and change the amount you're boosting or reducing by. Well, the filter works in FFT space, so why not take a ramp-like filter that doesn't make it a hard cut? It still does. If you have a filter, and you do, I don't know, let's take like a high shelf, or actually no, I can show you in this one. A low pass, so high shelf, low shelf here. I think I should be able to view it, but I'm not sure. I use a different EQ often, which I don't have in this one. Maybe it's possible. I don't know. I can quickly switch it up just to show you. Give me 1 second. And I need to launch this real quick. All right. If I quickly switch my windows to... Oh, that was a stop stream. 1 second. Let me share my screen. This is different software, which you're probably used to seeing. If I grab this EQ, the same concept as before, I can just change my band, pick my frequency, and change the range. Here, we have a nice little filter, so I can do the same thing as before, where I can take a high-pass filter, for example, like this. I can actually enable the visualization of the phase. I think I should be able to. Yeah, here you can see it. That maybe not be a good example, actually. So let me get you on disabled. Just get this. When I make a dip, this is what's effectively happening. The entire dip is happening, plus the increase in frequency there. So when I make a very extreme filter like this, it boosts everything massively there. So be careful with this. There's a way to fix it with this button here, which I will explain in a second. But this is what happens when you usually use EQ in any environments, analog, digital, no matter what you do. When you're not using any specific mode that cancels that out, you're going to have that issue. So let's get back to Reaper. Here we are. Same thing. Here is the same concept of EQ. And once again, this is a filter, so I can do the same thing that I had a second ago in my other plugin. I can do a high shelf filter, in this case, or shape. I can have my sound and low pass it. So that's the same thing, but in this case, I have a lot more control. In the previous one, we could just do this. We could move the filter left and right. Here we can change by how much the frequencies get reduced, and you can even boost them.
You slimy rat.
Which is quite painful to listen to. Oh, stop. And also in this case, we can change the slope to a very great extent. But I mean, with this filter, your phase is horrible.
You slimy rat.
But there is that. So EQ is very useful for when you want to cut out specific frequencies. This is a very clean recording.
You slimy rat.
But let's say I wanted to reduce the bass a little bit. If I hold this here, you can look at this spectrum here, the shape of these lines. You can see this one right here. There's a bit of a peak. So what I can do is create a thing there and slightly reduce it. So this is the original. Here's the reduced one. Bit extreme, but let's say I wanted to do that. I can use this and then reduce that frequency. So over time, as you do more editing and work with audio more, your ears get used to this. You learn to identify the problems and you learn to, handle the problems. So eventually when you listen to any sound or any voice acting line or whatever, you will be able to tell like, hey, that frequency is too loud or too soft or whatever, and you can boost them or reduce them. It takes training, and just by doing the work, you train your ears to do that. So EQs are useful for that, for tweaking your sound, and for something else as well. There's something which is often referred to as the vocal range. So lots of different frequencies. We hear typically from 0 to 20,000 hertz. For details on what that is, go to my other lecture on the AU YouTube page. But between 1,000 and 5,000 hertz, we have something called the vocal range. This is the region in which your ears are optimized to hear the human voice. So the shape of your ears, the width of your ear, the inner ear, is optimized to hear this frequency because the human voice typically has the strongest frequencies in this range. This is just an evolution thing where I guess it is, again, anyway, where over the ages, humans evolved to have this ear shape to be able to hear their kind easier over longer distances. So you'll hear if I cut this out,
You slimy rat. You slimy rat.
it becomes a lot harder to understand.
You slimy rat.
But when I cut this out,
You slimy rat.
you can still very, very much identify what's being said.
You slimy rat. You slimy rat. You slimy rat.
So they go here,
Oh boy,
or this one.
you'll be fish food in no time.
You'll be fish food in no time.
Second one is a lot more clear. So that's something to keep in mind if you are dealing with an environment in a game where there's a lot of sound going on and your voices aren't quite coming through. You can slightly boost that range
You'll be fish food in no time.
and maybe even the treble a tiny bit,
You'll be fish food in no time.
just to make it come through a little better. So be aware this is a very strong range. If you're having problems with, making your voice come out well, it could be that your low mids or your lows are too loud, or you could just boost this a little bit to make it easier. I think it's a side effect of the FFT. You can put a finished signal on the transformation. FFT is made for continuous function. FFT is a general digital audio phenomenon, I believe, like a subsystem that's used everywhere for everything. I'm pretty sure analog filters have the exact same issue, because analog filters use delay as well. And whenever you delay a sound by such a short measure, you get cancellation. That's just how physics works. So luckily, digital plugins have a counter for this, which I'm going to talk about now. It's something called linear phase. Essentially, is my stream paused? Is it still up? Because I can't view it. Oh, there we go. Essentially, linear phase, what it does My stream appears to be paused again. Not sure what's going on. I hope you can see it. What it does is it slightly delays the entire sound, so the actual playback of it as well, to make sure that the delay that's being used is not actually creating that extra bump at the end of your signal. It cancels that out, but in order to do that, it needs more time. So if you have a lot of linear phase using EQs in your project, you'll get to a point where you'll see sound popping up
You slimy
on your
rat.
meters, and you'll hear it like a second later. So linear phase is very useful for counteracting that, but it does add a lot of latency to your project. So really, what you want to do ideally is, or at least what I like to do, is to get everything working, get everything set up, use your EQing, and then once you're done with all your EQing, enable linear phase on the plugins that need it. For example, the EQs with like very steep peaks or dips. Enable linear phase and then render it, because again, for rendering, latency doesn't matter because there's no like time limit, and that will give you a slightly better sound. Linear phase isn't always the way to go. There are some issues with it, but generally speaking, is a safe thing to use. And with this EQ specifically, you get multiple modes, so I can change the precision of linear phase. The more precise it gets, the more latency I add. So that's something to be aware of. But I don't think most EQs have that option. It's just linear phase or zero latency in this case. So EQ, very powerful tool, also for eliminating room tone a little bit, and general room resonances after doing a recording. Very good, but once again, only use this when you have to, because that's kind of like a general rule. The more you tweak stuff, the more stuff you add, the more your signal gets corrupted. Well, not really corrupted, but the more it gets altered. And if you have a lot of plugins on your signal, it will lose quality slightly. There are some very advanced rules behind that with sample rates and other things, which I'll get to in a bit, but generally only use an effect when you absolutely have to. Just an important thing to keep in mind. No, that was actually that was EQ. Now we're moving on to compression. So I'm going to remove this. Compression is interesting because it has a very simple concept, but has an extreme amount of usages. You can use it in a lot of different ways, in a lot of situations, and it always is a viable tool. And frankly, the concept behind it is very simple. Compression works similar to a gate with a threshold. So
Slimy rat.
let's take a different line. I'm getting sick of this one.
Trespassers get the business end of my boot.
To that one. You can see my sound here, and I can set a threshold. So when it gets below the threshold,
Trespassers get the business end of my boot.
nothing happens. This is not like the gates, where if a sound was below my threshold, it wasn't playing. It still plays, and when it's above the threshold, nothing happens. At least that's for now, because the compressor is essentially an inverted version of the gate. It only detects stuff when the signal is above the threshold. And once it does, what it's actually going to do is it's going to reduce the volume of everything is below or above the threshold. So let's just pick a setting. I'm going to explain this later. If I have this, not much going on.
Trespassers get the business end of my boot.
And when I take this to the extreme,
Trespassers get the business end of my boot.
you hear it sounds quite distorted and quite weird because I've done very extreme compression here. So compression, what it actually does is it just reduces your dynamic range. So, for example, here,
Trespassers get the business end of my boot.
you can hear that here it gets kind of louder.
Trespassers get the business end of my boot.
So I can fix that with a bit of compression.
Trespassers get the business end of my boot.
Tiny bit. Takes some tweaking, but that's typically how it works. Just setting a threshold will allow you to detect the loudness of the signal. And then here with the ratio button, you can control how much the volume is being reduced when it gets above the threshold. The ratio has numbers, as you can see. It has, ignore the last number, but it says 1 to 11 right now, or 1 to 13. You can see my stream is kind of fucking up. Sorry for everyone in Discord and YouTube, this will be clear. What it means is that for every decibel that the sound gets over the threshold, it'll be reduced by the second number. So now, for every decibel that the sound gets over the threshold, it'll get reduced by 2 decibels, and now by 3, now by 4. You can take it very extreme to 100, which is completely ridiculous. But basically, that is how it works with every decibel you go over the threshold, it reduces that sound by whatever number you set here. You can actually see the volume limit here kind of increasing. So for example, if you have a very, very loud sound and your ratio is only on 1 to 3, for example, it actually won't get that much quieter. But when you have a much higher ratio, it will limit that sound a lot more. So you can hear the difference here. I'm just going to set a threshold
Trespassers get the business end of my boot.
and then increase the ratio by a lot. So let's listen to clean again.
Trespassers get the business end of my boot.
And now to extreme.
Trespassers get the business end of my boot.
Let's listen to that on a bit of a lower threshold.
Trespassers get the business end of my boot. Trespassers get the business end of my boot.
This is quite extreme. You can see it's reducing by 18 decibels here when I look at this red line.
Trespassers get the business.
Oh, well, about 15 maybe. Completely insane. Typically 1 to 4 is already quite a bit. You just want to play around with this, just hear what sounds good. But if you listen to any recording of sound, you can just get that radio compression effect. We do it quite extreme.
I'll buy myself one of those fancy cutlasses next time we're in Stros Mackay. We might need a bigger ship soon.
But there's 2 other settings that are quite important. Attack, kind of important, and especially release. So this is the same thing as with the gate. The attack indicates how quickly the compression will kick in after a sound goes above the threshold. So if I get the clean signal or the compressed signal,
I'll buy myself one of those fancy cutlasses next time we're in Stros Mackay.
this is quite a lot, but if I increase this to a lot,
I think I'll buy myself one of those fancy
if I do it very extreme here,
I'll buy myself one of those fancy cutlasses.
I can increase this all the way.
I think I'll buy myself one of those fancy cutlasses next time we're in Stros Mackay.
You don't notice it as much because it takes a while to kick in.
I think I'll buy myself one of those.
You can hear it kind of fading in. This is especially noticeable with the release. So this is the normal version.
I think I'll buy myself one of those fancy cutlasses next time we're in Stros Mackay.
And now let's tweak this to a full 2.5 seconds.
I think I'll buy myself one of those fancy cutlasses next time we're in Stros Mackay. We might need a bigger ship soon.
See, it takes a while before that line there, the red line goes up, and you could hear the sound fading back in.
I think I'll buy myself one of those fancy cutlasses next time we're in Stros Mackay.
Because I have a long release. When I turn this back down,
I think I'll buy myself one of those fancy
very quick. So that is the opposite of the attack button. When a sound is quiet enough to go below your threshold, the release button determines how quickly the volume reduction will fade out and fade away. So typically, just a useful tip, you want to keep your release not too low because it can make stuff sound quite messy. So if we take a very short release and quite extreme compression,
I think I'll buy myself one of those fancy cutlasses.
Quite insane if I up the release a bit.
I think I'll buy myself one of those fancy cutlasses next time we're in Stros.
It's not that bad to listen to.
I think I'll buy myself one of those. I think I'll buy myself one of those fancy.
A little bit more acceptable. I like about 700 milliseconds for voice acting. That's perfectly fine. You can go a little bit lower. Typically, try and stay above about 300 milliseconds.
I think I'll buy myself one of those fancy cutlasses next time we're in Stros Mackay.
This recording is very clean and very good. With dirty recordings, you want to be careful with this. Just experiment and see what works and see what sounds nice. And that is typically what compression can be used for just fixing stuff. For if you have a very dynamic recording with a lot of volume differences, you can reduce this and set it properly to reduce the very loud peaks, and that kind of reduces the dynamic range and makes everything sound a bit more consistent. And when you've done your compression, you have an output gain setting because, of course, if you're reducing a lot of sound, it gets quieter, so you can make up for that with makeup gain, which in this case is called wet gain, but whatever. This one has an auto gain, which automatically compensates, sort of. Most don't, so you'll notice if you're using another compressor, you may have to use makeup gain just to get the sound back up to its normal volume, but that's fine. There's some other settings with knee band, which, as you can see, you can see the line and kind of doing that. Typically, don't touch this too much if you're just doing basic voice editing. It's not super necessary. But it has something to do with smoothness, basically. So I like to leave it in the middle, just simple, not touch it. It just works like that. This one has a more advanced function called Sidechain, where you can have the compression only be applied to certain frequencies. So if my high frequencies are super loud, but my middle or low is fine, I can tweak this to only compress the high end if I wanted to. Quite advanced stuff. Usually for voice acting, it's not quite necessary, but it's there if you want it. And that's kind of a combination of compression and EQ. One common mistake I hear voice actors that are applying to projects make a lot is just using a fucking shitload of compression to the point where they sound like a podcast or a radio. It's just not necessary. Use compression and any effect only when you have to. So when your voice is being quite dynamic and it's just not really listenable on one volume because certain parts are loud, others are quiet, use compression a little bit to dip those loud parts down to get it nice and consistent, and that's it. For voice stuff, voiceover stuff, voice acting, that's all you're going to be using it for. So only use it for cleanup if you have to. For music and sound design, you can actually use compression for shaping. So if I'm quick, I can try and grab a drum loop for music just to show you this. I may have one on hand. Give me 1 second whilst I look for one. I don't actually know if I have one laying around. Just a second. I think I actually do. 1 second, please. I believe I have some nice drum loops made by myself. Yes, here's one. We can take this drum loop. Well, very simple drums. We're going to apply some compression to this. Compression is not used on just voices, but it's used on pretty much everything. It's very useful. You can see quite a lot of peaks in my sound because drums have very heavy transients, very heavy initial impact to their sound. So let's listen to the difference. Quite extreme. What's cool is you can use this to make it sound quite aggressive. It's an extreme example, but compare that to the clean signal. And this one even has multiple modes for like other functions like punch. And here I can actually mess around with my release value a lot. So if I have this, a lot of compression but still quite clean. If I reduce my release a lot, it's a lot more aggressive, a lot more dynamic in how it responds to the sound. So that's actually something you can use for music and stuff to control the behavior, not just reducing the sound and making it sound thicker, but actually changing the behavior from quite passive, but still quite heavy, to heavy and aggressive and fast. Pretty cool stuff. So that is just another little example of compression on anything other than voice acting. There's one other thing about compression that's quite useful that I use a lot. It's called multiband compression, which is kind of what I talked about a second ago. But the compression we saw here
again, and I'll break your fingers.
Is compression applied to the whole signal.
Again, and I'll break your fingers. Again, and I'll break your fingers.
But we can use another plugin. In this case, I'm going to use this one to only apply this to a specific frequency range, just like I did in the previous ones. Well, at least as I said you could. But here we have control over it, so I can change the threshold of my compression.
Again, and I'll break your fingers.
Change the range by how much is reduced, and the attack and the release. And also the ratio, actually. So it's pretty much just a compressor. There goes my drum loop. So the cool thing is, I can actually listen to these. So let's heavily compress some of the low mids here.
Can't wait to be out of Skyrim.
And then listen to it.
Can't wait to be out of Skyrim.
So I'm only going to compress that or only this.
Can't wait to be out of Skyrim.
So if I think that...
Can't wait to be out of
Oh, sorry.
Can't wait to be out of Skyrim.
Let's see, I might think this is a bit too loud.
Can't wait to be out of Skyrim.
The S sound.
Can't wait to be out of Skyrim.
You may find that your voice has a lot of loud S's. I know mine does. It can get quite annoying to listen to a recording of yourself when your S sound is constantly super loud and sharp. You can reduce this by applying compression only to the S sound region, essentially. So here you can listen to it. That's clear, the S. And it's quite loud.
Can't wait to be out of Skyrim. Can't wait to be out of Skyrim.
So we can actually reduce that sound. You can see that it's quite dynamic there. It kind of goes up a bit on the S, so we can reduce that a little bit, dip the range, and increase some of the settings, just to compress that initial S sound. And then
Can't wait to be out of Skyrim.
this is a bit much. You got to tweak it to make it sound right, and this S isn't particularly loud, but you may find yourself with a recording that's super S heavy, and then this is a very useful tool. Just applying compression only on the S.
Can't wait to be out of Skyrim.
Or when their voice is kind of inconsistent in their bass sound, you can apply it only to the bass regions.
Can't wait to be out of Skyrim. Can't wait to be out of Skyrim.
Which, again, in this case, is not what's happening, but you could do that if you have to. So that's compression kind of summed up. There's a lot more to it, but that's kind of how you can use it as a voice actor, general audio editor. There's one more thing I wanted to talk about, and that is general effects, as I called it. There's a lot more stuff you can do, and we're going to talk about that now. Let me quickly just...
Can't wait to be out of Skyrim.
There.
I think I'll buy myself one of those fancy cutlasses next time we're in Stros Mackay.
Sounds nice.
I think I'll buy myself one of those fancy cutlasses next time we're in Stros Mackay.
I hear some voice actors trying to imitate, let's say, keeping it in Skyrim context, a Daedra, like, I don't know, Marin's Dagon, or I think Hermes Mora has some pretty cool effects. Applying effects to your voice in a stylistic way, so not like this, as in fixing stuff, but actually using effects for a stylistic and artistic effect is a completely different story, and is often a lot more dangerous as well for your quality and for your overall perception of your sound. So let's start with one of the most common ones, which is Reverb. Sticking with the FabFilter plugin suite, this is Reverb.
I'll buy myself one of those fancy cutlasses next time we're in Stros Mackay. I think I'll buy myself one of those.
Reverb is really powerful. Like I can use this to make it sound like he's in a like a tight and closed space, like this.
I think I'll buy myself one of those fancy cutlasses next time we're in Stros Mackay. We might need a bigger ship soon. Quick, I think I'll buy myself one of those fancy cutlasses next time.
Here's it without.
I think I'll buy myself one of those.
And here's with the reverb.
I think I'll buy myself one of those fancy cutlasses next time we're in Stros Mackay.
And I can make it like he's in a bathroom with a bit more reverb.
I think I'll buy myself one of those fancy.
That's a bit too much. Let me reduce it a little bit.
I think I'll buy myself one of those fancy cutlasses next time we're in Stros Mackay. We might need a bigger ship soon.
But I can also make it sound like he's in a fucking concert hall. Or something like that.
I think I'll buy myself one of those fancy cutlasses.
A bit extreme. There's pretty good presets for this. So for example, small, we have, let's say, a room. You can hear or see that I actually used EQs here. This one's quite advanced because it has an EQ for the signal before the reverb, or the general signal on the reverb, and a different layer of decay to the reverb, which has a separate EQ setting. Don't worry about that too much. We have a bunch of settings here.
I think I'll buy myself one of those fancy cutlasses next time we're in Stros Mackay.
And I have larger ones, like, let's say, a choir hall. Lots of options here to make it sound like a voice is being played in a room. They use this in Skyrim quite obviously for the ghosts. If you ever listen to a ghost in Skyrim, their voice sounds kind of like this.
I think I'll buy myself one of those fancy cutlasses next time we're in Stros Mackay. We might need a bigger ship soon.
They have lots of reverb applied to the voice just to make them sound a bit ghostly. Very simple effect, but it works quite well.
I think I'll buy myself one of those fancy cutlasses next time we're in Stros Mackay. We might need a. Quit wasting my time, pickpocket.
So the reason I'm talking about this is because voice actors sometimes, when they send in stuff for applying to a project, they use effects, and they use them to the point where it's a bit too much. with reverb, this is one of the effects where that can happen quite a lot. This
Quit wasting my time, pickpocket.
is ridiculous. This
Quit wasting my time, pickpocket.
is a lot more understandable
Quit wasting my time, pickpocket.
and still makes a huge difference when compared to this.
Quit wasting my time, pickpocket. Quit wasting my time, pickpocket.
I've currently applied the reverb to the track of the voice directly. This is not ideal. Let's remove this. What you want to do when you're really doing reverb editing, let's remove this track just to remove confusion, is have a separate track. In this case, I'm going to call it reverb, and I'll make it a different color as well, just for fun, I guess. Boom, colors, that's a bit too similar. Let's go, whatever. And then you want to have your reverb plugin on this, and then use something called sends and buses, basically. So in Reaper, you do this by pressing this little route button here, which has fucking vanished for some reason. Quite curious. There's a shortcut for it as well, where you can just add a send. So typically, this track with the voice
Wait to be out of Skyrim.
is sending to my master the full thing that gets played to my speakers, but I can also send it to the reverb.
Wait to be out of Skyrim.
And now I have separate control.
Wait to be out of Skyrim.
So I have a lot more control over the reverb.
Skyrim. I think I'll buy myself one of those fancy
This is a much, much better way of applying reverb, and I'll show you why in a second. Another thing you can do here is add a general track here for your voice acting. So I can make sure that these are below it to send both into there. So this one is sending to this track, that one's sending to the main one, and that one's also sending to the main one above it. Which means that now...
Wait to be out of Skyrim. Buy myself one of
I fucked it up. It's a bit more complicated than that. That's different. That's general Reaper settings, which you don't need to worry about for now. You can have it set up in ways where you can separate your dry signal from your reverb signal and only listen to the reverb, which is super useful. But that's something for another time. I might get into that at some point. But for now, let's stick with this. So we have our reverb here, and this is on a separate track.
Can't wait to be out of Skyrim. I think I'll buy myself one of...
So I can now apply effects to only the reverb.
Can't wait to be out of Skyrim. I think I'll buy myself one of those fancy cutlasses next time we're in Stros Mackay.
And you can add more. We can have quite extreme stuff here. For example, distortion on the reverb is a dangerous thing.
Can't wait to be out of Skyrim. I think I'll buy myself one of...
You can hear that the voice itself
Can't wait to be out
is still clean. It's just the reverb that's kind of messed up.
Can't wait to be out of Skyrim.
So with this, you can basically add extra cleanup to only your reverb, which is insanely good. So if my reverb is a little bit, I don't know, bass heavy.
Can't wait to be out of Skyrim. I think I'll buy myself one of those... Can't wait to be out of Skyrim. I think I'll buy myself one of those fancy cutlasses next time we're in Stros Mackay.
You can hear the difference there.
I might need a bigger ship soon. Quit wasting my time, pickpocket. Do you think I'm an idiot?
So that way you can clean up only your reverb, which is quite useful because what reverb is essentially doing is stacking up frequencies. When I have this playing,
Can't wait to be out of Skyrim.
it's frequency after frequency just as it was recorded. But with reverb, it's sort of kind of extending existing frequencies, which means that when this one is playing, that one is still playing. So they add up. That's kind of how you can view it. Which means that if you have a voice that's kind of like mid-heavy, it'll get even heavier.
Wait to be out of Skyrim.
So in this case, I'm going to reduce the mid frequencies or low mids on the reverb
Wait to be out of Skyrim.
to compensate for that stacking up, basically. Another cool thing is if your reverb is quite short,
Wait to be out of Skyrim. I think I'll buy myself one of those fancy cutlasses next time we're in Stros Mackay.
you can already hear I didn't have to change much and it sounds a lot cleaner than last time. I don't have to fuck with the mix button. I can just use the volume control on the entire track.
Next time.
Very useful, and I can now apply our old friend compression to the reverb.
Can't wait to be out of Skyrim. I think I'll buy myself one of those fancy... Can't wait to be...
So with a longer reverb, you'll hear that a bit better. Oh, oops.
Can't wait to be out of Skyrim.
You can see it going up. You can hear it going up.
Can't wait to be out of Skyrim.
With an even longer reverb, you might be able to hear that even better. There we go.
Can't wait to be out of Skyrim.
So that way you have individual control over your reverb, which is so much better than just applying it on the track, because this gives you true control over your sound. And again, if you're using something in-game, you won't really have to apply reverb, because usually the game engine does that. But if you're doing editing for an animation, if you're mixing, let's say, the audio for an episode, you will absolutely use this. And you may even create individual reverb tracks for each room that the characters might be in, and just send them to the right reverb track for the right scene. Because that saves a lot of individual reverbs. You could just have one reverb for one specific room sound and send every character's voice there, instead of applying it to each individual track. This gives you more control over the reverb. It saves CPU, because you're only using one reverb for one room instead of 4 reverbs for 4 characters. And it just makes your whole project a lot easier to overview as well. So reverb specifically is not that useful for in-game usage, since it gets applied through the game engine. But just using effects on separate tracks is extremely useful, and that brings me to my next point, which is the kind of the final boss of, of separating tracks and effects. Let's say you want to have the voice of a big bad guy or whatever. What you can do is you can layer multiple effects. So I'm gonna send. Actually, I'll do a I don't know, chorus thing, a down pitched one. Let's leave it there for now. So I'm going to have this voice be kind of strange, maybe a bit alien or whatever. I am going to send it to the chorus. I'm going to add another send to the down pitch. And I'm going to slightly reduce the original send to the master. So
Can't wait to be out of Skyrim.
it's coming through both tracks now. Going to mute this one for now. Let's say I want to have a little bit of a chorusy effect. So I'm just going to use some general chorus. Not going to mess around with this too much.
Can't wait to be out of Skyrim. I think I'll buy myself one of those fancy cutlasses next time we're in Stros Mackay. Can't wait to be out of Skyrim.
Let's reduce this a little bit.
Can't wait to be out of Skyrim. I think I'll buy myself one of those fancy cutlasses next time we're in...
Quite a weird sound. And I'll add something more just for good measure. Let's add one of these. I'm not going to explain what this is, just to give you an idea of what you can do with separating tracks.
Can't wait to be out of Skyrim. I think I'll buy myself one of those fancy cutlasses next time we're in Stros Mackay. We might need... Can't wait to be out of Skyrim. I think I'll buy myself one of those fancy cutlasses next time we're in Stros Mackay.
So that's one. And then the other one, we're going to use something called pitch. So we're just going to pitch the entire thing down. That's the wrong plugin. This one.
Can't wait to be out of Skyrim. I think I'll buy myself one of those fancy cutlasses next
You can hear the original because it's still being sent. In fact, what I'll do is I'll just turn that off. There we go. I guess it doesn't like that, which is quite... Oh, of course. Yeah, it makes sense.
Can't wait to be out of Skyrim. I think I'll buy myself one of...
So there's a pitch.
Can't wait to be out of Skyrim.
I like fucking around with it.
Can't wait to be out of Skyrim.
Let's see, I want to have a bit of an edited voice with some, I don't know, like a sloat or some other big creature.
Can't wait to be out of Skyrim. I think I'll buy myself one of those fancy...
You can pitch it down. So what I have now is a pitch effect that I can then separately EQ
Can't wait to be out of Skyrim.
to boost the bass a little bit maybe, so I want to have it a bit deeper.
Can't wait to be out of Skyrim. I think I'll buy
And then I want to boost the bass a little bit,
wait to be out of Skyrim. I think I'll buy myself one of those fancy...
make it a bit more extreme, maybe even add a tiny bit of distortion just to make it even more aggressive.
Can't wait to be out of Skyrim. I think I'll buy myself one of those fancy cutlasses next time we're in Stros Mackay.
And then I can layer it with the chorus,
Can't wait to be out of Skyrim.
which in this case sounds really weird. But this is just an example.
Can't wait to be out of Skyrim. I think I'll buy
Bit too much on the pitch. Let's cut it up a little bit.
myself one of those fancy cutlasses next time we're in Stros Mackay.
This sounds kind of weird, but you get the idea. I can then have separate effects. So I could even, if I wanted to, I could add another pitch bus. So I'm just going to do that. Another pitch track, and I'll just send it there. Second pitch. and I can give this one a different pitch value.
Can't wait to be out of Skyrim. I think I'll buy myself one of those fancy cutlasses next time we're in Strosmakai.
Kind of like a weird, alarming voice in a way. I'm gonna make this other version a bit different.
Can't wait to be out of Skyrim. I think I'll buy myself one of those fancy cutlasses next time we're in Strosmakai. We might need a bigger ship soon. Can't wait to be out of Skyrim. I think I'll buy myself one of those fancy cutlasses.
Reminds me kind of like a voice like Subnautica or something, where you have like an AI talking to you, although it's a bit of a weird, down-pitched, crazy AI.
Can't wait to be out of Skyrim. I think I'll buy myself one of those fancy cutlasses next time we're in Strosmakai.
So that way you have a lot more in-depth effects usage just by having separate layers of effects. And then I can apply this, send it to a reverb track, which for good measure I make different. And I can actually send these effects separately to the reverb. So let's say I only want to send the second pitch to the reverb, and I want to get that other pitch track dry. I can just send it. I can apply a reverb plugin on this track.
Can't wait to be out of Skyrim. I think I'll buy myself one of those fancy cutlasses next
So now the reverb is only being applied to that track, so I can then, for good measure, heavily raise the pitch here.
Can't wait to be out of Skyrim. I think I'll buy myself one of those fancy cutlasses.
You can hear that the reverb is only on that track. So that way you have so much control over the individual layers within your effects. And this is what I've used in the past to make the Dramathra voices for Elsweyr. And I don't know if you've heard those, but I will pull them up real quick. They're kind of like the most extreme example of what you can do with layering your effects like this with multiple layers, which gives you individual control. Let me see if I have this. I think it's in Sound Design Dramathra. Dev Diary, Final, Mastered. 1 second. Here's a couple of Dramathra sounds for Elsweyr, which are heavily edited. Fucking loud as well. Holy shit. Very weird things. Strange, magical, kind of ghostly voices. This was done through separate effects. And I may even be able to pull up the original files that I used for this. I will grab them. I don't know if they're going to work, but give me just a second and I may be able to pull these up for the last few minutes of this thing. Let me have a quick look at this and see if I can pull this up. Yes, I can. So let me switch my stream around a little bit. And yes, Neon, I'm using Reaper. Very, very good editing software. Let me. I think my voice sounds kind of fucked up to everyone in the stream because I'm loading FL. On YouTube, it should be fine. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Hold on 1 second. Okay. It's all crashing. It's all gone wrong because FL was not prepared to run the stream today because of some settings. So we're going back to Reaper. Anyway, these are Dramathra sounds. They were made with an extreme version of those multiple layers. I think there's 5 different kinds of effects tracks, all being controlled separately, and then sent to a reverb as well. And that is only possible through separating the effects. You could never have something that complex and control it like that when applied directly to the voice track. So that's a very general tip. If you have to use heavy effects for something, use it on separate tracks just to get more control. There's one thing regarding pitch controls individually or specifically. When you pitch down a sound, I talked about this in my audio theory lecture. Watch it. If you want to get into audio editing, watch it. But sample rate is a thing when you pitch your sound down. So let's take Circuit's voice.
You slimy rat.
Alright, it's got a bunch of effects. Haha. Let me delete all these crazy things. Here we are. It's not set into the fucking master.
Slimy rat.
We're back at the slimy rat. Let's take this and pitch it down an extreme amount.
You slimy rat.
If I grab an EQ, you will hear, or see rather, if I get the normal sound,
You slimy rat.
sounds fine.
Slimy rat.
If I do this, it loses a bit of high end in this range. And no matter how much I boost it, I will not pick it up. This is because microphones only record up to a specific frequency. And when you pitch down your sound by 2 octaves, you're pulling those high frequencies down and you are lowering them. And there's a point where frequencies that are usually above 20,000 hertz that you usually cannot hear, they'll get pulled into the 0 to 20,000 hertz range where you'll be able to hear them. And if you pull them too far, they'll end up like about here, and there won't be any frequencies up here. As you can see here, this is a lot more quiet than when I turn off the pitch effect. Wrong one.
You slimy rat.
Lots of activity here, no activity there. So you can prevent this by recording in a higher sample rates. Typically, I think this sound was recorded using a sample rate of 44.1, as it's called. If you recorded a higher sample rate, you were able to record higher frequencies. So your microphone, if you have a really insane microphone, might be able to record to 60,000 hertz, for example. If you run your sound recording on 44.1, the general rule is cut your sample rate in half. That is the maximum frequency you're able to record. So on 48,000 hertz, the maximum frequency you can record is 24,000 hertz. Sorry, let me rephrase that. On 48,000 samples per second in your sample rate, the maximum frequency you can record is 24,000. So if you record something on 96,000 samples per second, you'll actually be able to record to over 40,000 hertz, which if you then start pitching stuff down is really good, because you could pitch something down an octave when your sound's 40,000 hertz and it'll be at 20,000. So if you are planning on recording something for a super heavy, deep sound and you have to pitch it down a lot, if you know that beforehand, turn up your sample rate, because that will allow you to pitch down your sound a hell of a lot without losing your treble. There are tricks of fixing it if you can't do that, but typically, if you're doing down pitching, make sure you're recording in a higher sample rate whenever you can. So that's a little general tip there. Quite advanced. Again, if you want to understand this stuff in the fundamental level, watch my other lecture on audio theory. It's on the AU YouTube channel. And there's Ashley. Please feel free to go over into my time if you feel necessary waiting for DoorDash. I did kind of go over my most of my stuff. Once again, this actually, I said it several times this lecture, it applies especially to effects like the ones we just did, which I may be able to get back. Haha, I can I?
You slimy rat.
Yep. So effects like this,
You slimy rat. I saw that.
quite heavy. Be very careful with effects. You can very easily overdo it. You can very easily mess it up. And I hear it a lot in voice actors that are applying to the projects where they just overuse effects. Or they'll have like a demo reel, which then has a bunch of sound effects and heavy, crazy effects built into it. Avoid that. A good audio editor, a good voice caster will be able to tell if your voice will fit in an environment or not. For a demo, please do not add a shitload of sound effects and a shitload of other stuff to give context. All we really need is just to hear your voice, hear your performance, and hear your sound quality. It's good to understand the stuff I just said and how to edit your voice and how to clean it up and how to maybe even add additional effects for characteristics if necessary. But remember, even though I've been talking about effects for an hour, remember that in the end, the most important thing about voice acting is your voice and is your voice acting. If you have a great sound quality, great editing, and your voice acting is terrible and there's no emotion, then it's completely pointless. So with voice actors who want to get into this stuff, I know this all sounds complex and kind of scary, all the editing. Focus on your acting first. Focus on that, because if you can't get that right, this will never matter anyway. So do not buy a super expensive micro interface while you're practicing. Just focus on your acting. Your voice acting teachers will be able to listen through the bad quality. It's fine. It's just that if you want to get into a project, obviously you need to get both the acting and the sound quality right, obviously. But for learning, acting is the most important. And if you then want to get into editing, that's a different story. You can watch this lecture and the other one I did, and a lot of other videos on YouTube and other platforms that just tell you this stuff. But yeah, that's kind of it. So remember, editing is important, but it can only fix so much. Fix your acting first, fix your equipment afterwards, and then worry about editing, because no amount of editing can fix a broken input, period. I think that's all I have. Thanks for linking the lecture, Pat. You have one very simple question. What are some good microphones and additional equipment if necessary for voice acting, and what are the price ranges? Depends. I often hear people say that an XLR mic, which is a different cable type, is good. It's not really a thing. Just because your mic has XLR doesn't mean it's good. If you want to have specific details on what microphones are good, I recommend DMing Shino Zoku, who is one of our voice acting and audio guys. He's very knowledgeable on gear specifically. I'm a little less. There's one thing you should note, though. You can buy an expensive microphone, but an expensive microphone will still sound like shit when it's being plugged into a bad interface. Very decent interfaces for voice acting, for starting out and for doing your first couple of years of work, are Focusrite Scarletts. Focusrite Scarlett 1 or 2i2. Very decent interfaces for starting out. I think they're about $80, and they're not that expensive. And there may be microphone guides in the pins of voice acting too, so pay attention to those. Typically, if you want to get into voice acting and want to get true quality, avoid USB mics. Typically, avoid Blue Yetis, avoid Snowballs. The Blue Yeti is not a good fucking microphone. Wake up, please. Do not believe the lies. Blue Yetis and Blue Snowballs are absolute garbage if you want true voice acting, because they sound nice, they sound good, other microphones do too, but when you start to apply heavy effects like we've just done, the noise floor of your microphone and the lack of quality will surface, and it will cause issues. So I don't know about price ranges all too much, but typically do not just buy any microphone someone is advising. There may be more to it. So look around, ask people if you can. I cannot give you direct advice on microphones right now because I'm not too knowledgeable. I have one that's complete overkill. Yeah, I know, Pat. You're guilty. A lot of people have
kill someone.
A lot of people have Blue Yetis and Snowballs. They are fine for Discord calls and streaming, but for audio that needs to be edited and heavily affected, it's going to be an issue. So if you really want to get into voice acting and you're 100% sure about it and it's going well, you're going to start to improve, you really want to up your quality game, basically, because it's going to matter. Eventually, you're going to have to voice some big bad guy that's going to have a voice that's down-pitched, and then when the effects get applied, you will hear the artifacts, you will hear the problems. But again, for learning, do not buy an expensive microphone and interface. You don't need it. For learning, focus on your acting. It is far more important. And once you got that down and starting to go well, you can look into quality and then into the technical stuff. I think that's all. If there's any questions, let me know now. And otherwise, it is time for my great friend Ashley to take over with some complicated stuff that I do not understand a fucking thing about. I think I saw one more question.
It's just